The PGA Tour is finally opening the door for some live golf defectors to come back. But for the man who started it all, that door is not just closed, it is locked from the inside. Phil Mickelson thought his massive influence and past major wins would guarantee him a clear pathway back to the sport he helped change. He was completely wrong. The people holding the keys to his return are not just anonymous tour executives in suits, they are his former peers in the locker room, active major champions who sit on the policy board, looked at his situation and made a unified, calculated decision to keep him out. They did not make this choice out of pure personal anger. They did it to protect the fragile current structure of the tour. The tour cannot just publicly say Phil is banned forever. That looks terrible for the sport and invites endless legal problems. They needed a smart solution to fix this mess. They had to create a system that looks completely fair on the surface. This system had to welcome back the recent defectors to save their TV ratings. At the exact same time, it had to permanently block the original architects. That exact balance required a very specific mathematical trap. You have to look closely at the exact voting criteria they approved to see how perfectly it targets his specific legacy. Every single word in that new policy was chosen to solve a massive problem for the tour, while creating an even bigger nightmare for Phil. I believe the tour had to draw a hard line to survive, but do you think they went too far by permanently exiling Phil? Tell me your exact thoughts in the comments. Officials called this new system the Returning Member Program. The name alone tells you how the tour wants the public to see it. A program, a pathway, a welcoming gesture for players who made a mistake and want to come home. On the surface, it reads like generosity. The PGA Tour is telling the world they forgive. They are willing to move past the worst civil war golf has ever seen. Players who left for guaranteed money in the desert can now apply to return. They can rejoin the FedEx Cup. They can play full schedules again. They can compete for major exemptions through the tour. It sounds like everyone gets a second chance. Behind that generous name sits a document designed to exclude specific people by design. The financial requirements are steep. Any player who wants back in must write a check. $5 million goes to a charitable foundation chosen by the tour. On top of that, returning players face a one-year suspension from signature events. They lose their priority ranking. They start at the bottom of the pecking order. For most players, that is painful. For a guy like Brooks Koepka or Bryson DeChambeau, it stings. They swallow their pride, sign the check, and get back to competing against the best fields in the world. The money hurts, but it does not destroy them. They can earn it back within 2 seasons. Money was never the real wall keeping Phil out. The $5 million penalty applies equally to everyone. Phil could write that check tomorrow without blinking, as $5 million is a rounding error for his massive net worth. So if money is not the barrier, what is? The answer lives inside one specific clause buried in the eligibility requirements. A clause that looks completely neutral to anyone reading it for the first time. A clause that the tour legal team spent months perfecting before the policy board ever saw it. One voice in that room pushed harder than anyone else to make sure that clause existed. That voice belongs to someone who remembers the personal attacks and the attempts to recruit him to live while he still wore a tour hat. This is deeply personal. And when that player walked into the policy board meeting to cast his vote, he carried every single one of those memories with him. His influence on the board is not just symbolic. As a player director, his vote carries the same weight as any other member. His public statements carry the weight of multiple major championships. When he speaks, the rest of the locker room listens. Personal history made this vote feel less like policy and more like a verdict. The policy board itself is not some distant corporate entity. It is made up of active players, tournament directors, and tour executives. The player directors are the ones with the most credibility. They are guys still competing every week. They still share the practice range and clubhouse with the men they are voting on. Imagine sitting across a table from a guy you cheered for at Augusta and voting to permanently end his career. That is the reality of what happened in that room. The vote was not a formality. There was debate. There was pushback from at least one member who argued for a broader eligibility window. Voting was not unanimous, which makes the final result even more significant. The member who argued for a wider window wanted to include major champions from an earlier year. That single-year difference would have changed everything. It would have opened the door for Phil. It would have let Dustin Johnson back in. Patrick Reed, Sergio Garcia, all of them would have qualified. 1 year. That is all that separated inclusion from permanent exile. The board discussed it, running the numbers on TV contracts, sponsor relationships, and fan sentiment. Ultimately, the majority decided 1 year was too generous. They moved the window forward. They made it tighter. They made it so specific that only a handful of recent winners could pass through. What sealed his fate was not hatred, It was a calendar. For months, the tour communications team prepared the public rollout. They drafted press releases emphasizing fairness and lined up player interviews about unity. Not once in those public statements did anyone mention the specific eligibility dates. Not once did anyone explain why certain major champions qualified while others did not. The tour wanted the narrative to be about healing. They did not want anyone asking why the man who won his last major just before the split was not on the list. They hoped nobody would do the math. Public relations can only hide the truth for so long before the numbers start talking. The numbers tell a very specific story about who gets to stay and who gets to go. The board knew that simply banning the LIV founders by name would trigger massive lawsuits. It would look like a vindictive witch hunt. They needed a metric that sounded objective. They needed a metric that sounded like it was based on competitive relevance rather than personal grudges. So they looked at the history of the sport and picked the one achievement that matters most in golf: winning a major championship. But just winning a major was not enough to pass the test. The timing of that win was the actual key. Timing is everything in professional golf, and this rule weaponized the clock. Think about the sheer volume of major championship winners over the last decade cycling through Augusta, Pebble Beach, and St. Andrews. The board had to draw a line somewhere in that timeline. If they drew it too far back, they would let in too many older players who no longer draw TV ratings. If they drew it too far forward, they would block the current stars who actually drive the sport right now. Finding that exact sweet spot required looking at the exact dates of every single major win since the LIV announcement. A single specific year became the ultimate dividing line for an entire generation of golfers. The board was not just thinking about Phil, they were targeting the entire ecosystem of the rival league. The men who joined in the first wave caused the most damage, taking massive sponsors and disrupting broadcast deals. The board wanted to ensure the original architects received no golden parachute, while showing newer recruits that joining later brings different consequences. This created a massive divide, separating the guys who built the league from the guys who just showed up to cash the checks. The newer recruits realized they had a lifeline. They saw the penalties, but they also saw the open door to the FedEx Cup. The original architects, however, started looking at the eligibility requirements and realized the math was working against them. The tour had built a trap specifically for their era. Structural erasure is a lot quieter than a public ban, but it is infinitely more permanent. The public did not see this realization happening. Cameras only captured players happily signing paperwork, while broadcast networks loved the redemption storylines. Fans were thrilled to see the best fields back together, completely ignoring the guys sitting at home looking at a rulebook that explicitly excluded them. Managing the narrative is easy when the people left behind have no platform to complain. But the people left behind are not just random tour pros. They are famous, wealthy, and influential. They have the money for top lawyers, the media connections to leak the story, and the personal motivation to expose the trap. It was only a matter of time before the eligibility details reached the press, and the illusion of fairness started to crack. Illusions of fairness shatter the moment you look at the exact calendar year they chose. The exact calendar year they chose was 2022. That single date is the key to understanding why Phil is permanently excluded. The policy board looked at the history of the sport and drew a hard line right after the 2021 season. They decided that only major winners from 2022 through 2025 deserve a second chance. It creates a brutal two-tier system inside the locker room. On one side, you have the newer defectors who fit the timeline. They can pay the fee, accept the restrictions, and return to the tour. The original founders of the rival league remain completely blocked by this timeline. The main golf organization essentially used the calendar to erase a specific era of history. They found a way to welcome back the current stars while permanently locking out the men who started the rebellion. Such a smart political move sends a clear message to anyone who might think about leaving in the future. Phil won the PGA Championship in May of 2021, 1 year too early. The rule does not care about his 6 major titles. It does not care about his 30-plus years on tour. It does not care that he was the face of professional golf for 2 decades. The rule cares about one thing. Did you win a major after January 2022? Phil did not. The door stays shut. And the man who pushed the hardest for this exact 2022 cutoff was sitting right across the table from him in the boardroom. Driving force behind this exact 2022 cutoff was a player who remembers every single slight. That driving force is Rory McIlroy. His role as a player director gave him direct input into the eligibility criteria. He sat in the room when the 2022 cutoff was proposed. He did not object. Multiple sources close to the board confirmed that Rory actively supported the narrow window. His reasoning was not complicated. In his view, the players who left in 2022 and 2023 made a financial decision during a specific period of chaos. They can be reintegrated. The players who left before that, the ones who helped build the rival league from the ground up, made a different kind of choice. A structural choice. A choice that caused lasting damage to the tour sponsor base and its television deals. Rory drew a line between those two groups. Phil falls on the wrong side of it. Rory's signature on that document turned a policy debate into a permanent sentence. Rory remembers the recruitment calls and the pressure during early live negotiations when Phil tried pulling top players away. That frustration never went away. When the eligibility criteria came up for a vote, Rory backed the narrow window and the exclusion of the original architects without hesitation. His massive public influence gave the policy the player endorsement it needed to pass. His public stance made it impossible for anyone else on the board to argue for a wider window without looking disloyal. Rory did not act alone. He needed a fierce ally to ensure the language was airtight. That ally was Justin Thomas, who also remembers the personal attacks and recruitment attempts while he was still winning for the tour. Thomas publicly stated that Phil's handling of the split was disrespectful to loyal players. When the 2022 cutoff was finalized, Thomas voted yes without hesitation. Thomas had the votes to guarantee the original architects were locked out, and he used them. Together, Rory and Justin formed the core of a unified front. Other active major champions followed their lead, protecting their FedEx Cup earnings and sponsor relationships. The logic was consistent across the room. The founders built the weapon, while the later recruits just picked it up. Those two groups should not receive the same treatment. Ultimately, the final vote passed with a clear majority, sealing the fate of everyone who fell outside that 2022 window. Phil Mickelson, Dustin Johnson, Patrick Reed, and Sergio Garcia were officially locked out. For Phil, the math is simple and brutal now. He is 54 years old. He cannot win a major between 2022 and 2025 because that window has already closed. The rule is not a temporary restriction he can wait out. It is a permanent structural exclusion based on a past event he cannot change. He cannot pay his way back in. The $5 million donation is irrelevant to him because he does not meet the base eligibility requirement. He cannot appeal to the commissioner. The policy board vote is final, leaving him with absolutely no legal pathway back to the tour. Dustin Johnson faces the exact same wall. His last major win was the 2020 Masters. Patrick Reed won the 2018 Masters. Sergio Garcia won the 2017 Masters. All three fall outside the 2022 window. All three are permanently excluded alongside Phil. The tour created a two-tier system without ever using those words publicly. Tier 1 includes the recent defectors who can pay a fine and return. Tier 2 includes the original architects who can never come back. The public sees a forgiveness program. Reality is a targeted exclusion dressed up as policy, and the collateral damage is staggering. 4 of the biggest names in golf history are now structurally erased from the tour future. Their major wins still count in the record books. Their names still appear in the history of Augusta and Pebble Beach. Their ability to compete on the tour they built is gone forever. The door is shut, and nobody on the current board is reaching for the handle. Phil's actual options right now are almost non-existent. LIV Golf continues to operate, but its events carry no world ranking points. His competitive relevance fades with every passing month. He can play senior events next year, join exhibition matches, or do broadcast work. He can design golf courses, but he can no longer compete on the very stages he helped make famous. What he cannot do is tee it up on a Thursday morning at a PGA Tour event and compete for a FedEx Cup title. That chapter is finished. The men who voted him out made sure of it. They did not need to say his name in the policy document. They did not need to hold a press conference explaining why Phil specifically was excluded. They just needed to pick the right year for the cutoff. 2022, not 2021, not 2020. 2022. 1 year made all the difference. Every year that passes makes his situation more permanent. The tour moves on. New stars emerge. The broadcast deals get renegotiated without his name attached. Phil becomes a footnote in the very organization he spent 3 decades building, creating a massive paradox. The irony is impossible to ignore. Phil Mickelson spent 20 years as the most marketable player on the PGA Tour. He drove television ratings. He attracted sponsors. He was the face of tour posters and commercials when Tiger rested. He built the commercial infrastructure current players benefit from. The FedEx Cup, signature events, and player impact program all grew during Phil's peak years. The very system that now excludes him is a system he helped create. TV money that funds the $5 million penalty exists because Phil made the tour watchable for 2 decades, yet he is the one paying the ultimate price. The policy board used the machinery Phil helped build to permanently remove Phil from the machine. Rory and Justin used the modern tour structure to lock out the man who laid the foundation for it. It is the ultimate corporate takeover. The shareholders voted to remove the founder because his methods were too disruptive for the current business model. Phil broke golf in half, and now he watches from the outside as the tour stitches itself back together without him. Becoming a ghost haunting a building he helped construct is his new reality, and the tour has no intention of letting him back inside. If you want to keep following the real stories behind golf's biggest decisions, hit subscribe so you never miss a breakdown like this one.